You set foot on foreign soil. Only this land isn't ruled by any country or government. In this land we celebrate music. In this land we celebrate games. In this land we celebrate those who compose video game music. Welcome to the VGMbassy. Welcome and thanks for tuning in to another episode of the VGMbassy. This is a show centered around video game music and the amazing online community of fans and podcasters that enjoy it. My name's Ed, and on each episode I'll take the role of Prime VGM Minister and invite a guest VG Ambassador onto the show to share with us their own video game music culture. Or I may share a part of my culture on a solo show, or on a show with a guest. This is episode, 70, 79, 80? One of those numbers up there. Descent with Justin. Justin and I are descending into a pit of giggles at this point. Yeah. It's been a long day. Yeah, so Justin, welcome back to the VGMbassy. How are you, sir?
I'm well. It's great to be back. Third time's a charm.
I know. Again, it feels weird not to be talking about gothic and industrial music. But I love having you on because, A, you're very close by, but we have very similar tastes in games and music, and that's great. And so when I thought about doing a music history show on the Descent series, I immediately thought of you because it has a lot of really cool, dark dance, techno, industrial stuff that I know you love because we share it together on Arcane Machine. So even if you weren't immediately familiar with the music and or the game, I thought that if you listened to the soundtracks, something would definitely grab you. Did you feel like it did?
Oh, 100%. I mean, every soundtrack that I listened to had definitely something on it that I would want to play, and a lot of them it was actually kind of hard. Some of them it was an easy pick only because it was just like, oh, this is technically a track that I already know. Almost, I think they are licensed tracks.
Yeah, so there are a couple licensed tracks on there.
Yeah, so like by default, I want to pick that. And then it was also cool that certain soundtracks had songs from the other games. So like if I didn't pick a track that I liked in one game, it might be on the next game. I'm like, oh, cool. Well, I'm going to play that because I really like that one.
Yeah, I agree. We had a lot of, like a cornucopia of really good tracks to pick from, and they would kind of repeat sometimes here and there. As we do usually with my music history shows, we sometimes take little detours into topic-adjacent stuff. We're going to be visiting a couple of games that are heavily inspired by Descent, but not in the actual Descent series. We've got different soundtracks from the same game. Sometimes a game would have a MIDI soundtrack and a Red Book audio soundtrack, or it would have come out on the PlayStation and have a different soundtrack as the computer version. Yep. So we're going to be listening to lots of samples from lots of this. We've got almost 20 tracks to go through during the show. So, hey, it might be a long one, but I hope it's a fun one. If you are a fan of, dance music or industrial music or dark wave, synth wave, there's a little bit of everything here for you. Even a little bit of like cinematic style stuff as we get down towards like the Descent Free Space games towards the end of the show. So I hope that everyone enjoys it a lot, as much as we do. Descent first came out on the PC and Mac in 1995. It was developed by Parallax Software, and it was released around the time where Doom was making a big splash, Quake was making a big splash, first-person shooters were like new and burgeoning and really inspiring lots of game developers. And the gentleman at Parallax Software saw the success of these games and was like, well, you can move on 2 axes and you can maybe jump up and down to a platform, but what if we have you move in 6 different axes freely, no gravity, up, down, left, right, twisty-turny. And so that's why I lovingly refer to Descent as Doom but barfy. So if you can imagine yourself in a giant maze, like an ant city underground or something like that, you're in a spaceship and you can rotate, pitch, yaw, up, down, left, right, any direction you want and travel in that direction, backwards or forwards. The mazes and the levels that you go through are just huge series of rooms and tubes, and it can get dizzying, especially if you are the motion sick kind of person like my wife, who can't even watch F-Zero while not getting sick on the SNES. She would never, ever. Do you have any gameplay experience with the Descent series?
So I haven't played it myself, but I remember a time back in like high school being at a friend's house, and he had this on his PlayStation, and I remember watching him play it, and it was really wild to watch. I never picked up the controller. I don't think he wanted to give it up either, but I never really had the interest in diving in because my experience with first-person shooters was like, Wolfenstein 3D. And it was a fun game, but it also, first-person shooters never really were my style. So this one was a lot more maze-like, so it reminded me a lot of Wolfenstein, but it was just cool to watch somebody else go through it and kind of like sit back on the couch and just watch, running into walls or whatever he's doing, trying to actually control on those axes.
Yeah, same. I wasn't really too aware of it. I remember going to a video rental store to rent a PlayStation game at one point, and picked up the box for the PlayStation 1 port of the game, and looked on the back of the box, and it said, there's music from Skinny Puppy and Typo Negative, like, in the liner notes on the back of the box. And I was like, that's enough to sell me on the product. So I brought it home, and I had a lot of fun with it. And from then on, I always was kind of like looking at decent, like I played the other games in the series, but never played the first one on the PC. And the music was great throughout all of them. So it's always been one of those series that I've just kind of like had in the back of my head that I've always wanted to do a show with somebody at some point, and the opportunity just presented itself. So I'm excited to get into the music and further topics.
Me too.
We will be listening to some of that Typo Negative and Skinny Puppy music later on in the show. But to start off, we always like to start at the very beginning. The original game was released on several floppy disks. And this was before CD-ROMs or even, a general medium that you would print your games on. So most of them had MIDI soundtracks, mod soundtracks, etc. So we're going to listen to samples from the MIDI versions of the first game. And these soundtracks also came in a couple of different sound fonts and sound hardware that you can play them with. And that included the OPL3, the Sound Canvas, the Roland JV1010, and our favorite Creative AW32 Blaster. So, of all of these soundtracks, we've each picked one that kind of grabbed our ear the most. Justin, what did you pick for our first track tonight?
So I picked level 22, Neptune Storage Depot, and this is the OPL3 version.
All right, this is composed by Ken Allen, Brian Luzietti, Larry Peacock, Leslie Spitzer, Jim Torres, and Tim Wiles. Be right back.
All right, that was level 22, Neptune Storage Depot, and that was the OPL version of the song.
I dig this one, man. It's funny because you released on XVGM Radio, you and Mike released Gem Sound Driver. I forgot the actual title of the show.
The best and worst of.
Best and worst of Genesis Gems, yes. And you guys played, or Mike played a track from the X-Men 2 Clone Wars.
Oh, yes.
And that bump, 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 bump bass sounds almost identical to in that game. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's a fair point. It's a really thick bass, which is really cool. Not quite a buzzy bass, which is what I tend to listen for, but...
It's like a bubbly bass.
Yeah, but I still enjoyed it. So I picked this one because out of the other tracks that I'd listened to that you hadn't already picked, this one, the melody was just like an earworm. It got stuck in my head, and even as soon as it started playing, I was like, oh, I'm going to hear this for the next 3 days. Okay, well, so you're welcome for that. And then I also just like how, and I know this is, it's MIDI and it's a little bit chippy already, but I like how it gets extra chippy in the middle, with the arps and stuff going on. And just it brings me back to more of a retro console vibe than anything else. And I like the kind of mixture of that.
Agreed. So OPL3 is kind of it's a weird mix of, so it's an FM chip that uses MIDI instructions, which is not similar to most of the other, Yamaha chips out there. So yeah, what you're getting is songs composed in a MIDI style, but that sound like they've come out of a Genesis or a Sharp X68000, etc. So, and that's why I think that this tune in particular works best on the OPL3 chip. It's because of that bass tone. When you use a regular MIDI sound font with this tune, that bass just doesn't sound nearly as rich and funky as it does on this one. So I'm glad that you picked this version of this song.
Me too. Yeah, and I did listen to it across, that was the thing, is I had to narrow down which song I wanted to play on any of the soundtracks, and I had to listen to it across all the soundtracks just to figure out which version I was going to play.
I know, it ended up being 60 songs or something.
But no, it was a lot of fun. Admittedly, I'm not the most into doing research for any episode of any podcast that I'm in, but this was fun because of all the different options.
I agree, and I'm glad you like that part. And I'll take care of all the research stuff. So, in the mid-'90s when these games were coming out, there was such a diversity of audio hardware you could have either built into or purchased separately for your computer. And so that means that composers really had to compose for a multitude of different sound hardware, and some succeeded more than others. Sometimes you would get actually differently composed versions of the soundtrack, depending on if you had, the Adlib OPL3, or if you had a sound canvas, or just using a general MIDI sound font. And then sometimes they would just compose one song, and it was take it or leave it. They would compose for general MIDI, and if you had an OPL3, maybe it sounded good, maybe it didn't, but that's how it worked. And it's funny because when I was playing Doom at home as a kid, I remember always, having the choice between MIDI and FM and all that, and I would always choose the OPL3 Adlib soundtrack just because I liked the way the FM sounded so much more, and then grew up to not like the Genesis sound hardware until well into Pixel Tunes Radio, kind of like you did. So, but I thought that was funny. It just, it sounded more meaty, and I think that's what comes out in this as well. So we've got another track to get through for the MIDI-based soundtrack on Descent, but first let's talk a little bit about the gameplay and development of Descent 1. This was the first-person game to feature true 3D graphics, unlike Doom and its clones, which used warping 2D sprites to simulate a 3D perspective. It was also the first-person shooter to utilize true 6-directional movement.
Oh, that's really cool. I thought it was. I wasn't sure, though. So the player is playing a mercenary who's hired by the Post-Terran Mining Corporation, specifically to eliminate the threat of a mysterious extraterrestrial computer virus that is infecting off-world mining robots. And
spooky space virus.
Yeah, and wouldn't you guess it takes place in the future, the year 2169.
Nice.
But in the game, you are referred to as the Material Defender. In a series of mines throughout the solar system, starting with Earth's moon and then traveling outward towards Charon, which is one of Pluto's moons. You pilot a spaceship, and you have to locate and destroy the mine's power reactor and escape being caught in the mine's self-destruction. It reminds me of Star Fox.
Yeah, absolutely. Or Starblade Alpha, where you know, the last you have to destroy the core and then leave before it explodes.
Yeah.
Or Star Wars, or any one of those games that this whole thing is kind of based on.
Yeah. Along that way, there are hundreds of infected mining robots and power cores to defeat or destroy.
Lots of basically mid-bosses, but the mid-bosses and bosses are kind of like passive cores that you really just have to shoot while dodging all the other enemies. There's not a lot of at least in this particular game, there's not a lot of really active bosses that are like throwing, like curtains of bullets at you or anything like that. There was also a multiplayer mode. You can play cooperatively or do deathmatch against other players or to take on the robots together. And multiplayer wasn't actually originally planned. They wanted to make it a single player experience, but the executives at Interplay saw that, Doom and multiplayer was becoming extremely popular, and they were like, why don't you go ahead and put some multiplayer in your game? And they were like, I don't know if it's going to work on 6 axes. And it did. It took a little bit longer for the game to come out because of it, but they ended up getting it working, and it was fun, and people really enjoyed it.
So Descent was co-created by programmers Mike Koulos and Matt Toshlag. They actually met while working at Sublogic, which was the developers of the original Microsoft Flight Simulator. I guess that's the one that you can play in Microsoft Excel in 1997? Probably not. But they both joined developer Looking Glass to help develop Car and Driver around 1988, and it was there that they got the idea for Descent. So not wanting to share the concept or IP with Looking Glass, they left in 1993 to incorporate their own development house called Parallax Software. It then took almost 2 years to develop the game to a marketable point, during which Apogee invested and then dropped the project after pitching to 50 different publishers and receiving only 3 replies. They ended up signing on with a very enthusiastic Interplay. And the original name of the game was Miner, then changed to Inferno, and finally settled on Descent.
Yeah, I feel like because it was called Miner at the beginning, that the gameplay style might have originally been more of a exploring these mines and collecting resources kind of a deal. And then when they saw the popularity of Doom, ended up making it more of a shooty action game. I thought that was really, really interesting when I read that. And then I think at the point where they probably ended up calling it Inferno, that's maybe when they were getting towards a more you versus hundreds of enemies instead of you maybe dodging enemies while trying to, mine these locations. So I'm just inferring that. Don't take that as fact, but I'm just, thinking that might be what it was. Yeah. The game cost about $450,000 to make in $1990, and Interplay spent $1 million marketing it. And based on the incredible sales and popularity, they thought it was well worth it. It's funny how they went out to 50 different companies and only 3 people got back.
Right.
It's like if I saw a pitch like this where it was like, hey, this is Doom, but go in any direction you want, as a game executive, I probably would have been like, yeah, this sounds like a really good idea. Yeah. Let's at least invite you in and hear more, I wonder what the other 2 companies were that, talked to them. But I guess, Interplay, this series obviously went on for quite a while, so I think they made the wise choice by going with them. And it just shows that these guys really were confident in what they had. They were... who knows how long it took them to send out to 50 different companies. Back before the internet, it's like you couldn't just... send off a group email full of screenshots and stuff. You had to probably mail a marketing package out to them.
Oh yeah, and that's a good point too. And then mailing 50 of those out, that right there probably cost a good chunk.
Oh yeah,
of whatever capital they had.
Printing materials and postage and all that stuff. Absolutely crazy. So what do you say we get on to our next track? This is my pick. This is the Sound Canvas 55 version of Level 3 Lunar Military Base. Enjoy. right, you're listening to Level 3 Lunar Military Bass from the original Descent game released on PC and Mac in 1995, composed by Ken Allen, Brian Luzietti, Larry Peacock, Leslie Spitzer, Jim Torres, and Tim Wiles. And we'll be learning a little bit about them very shortly. But first, Justin, your thoughts?
Very electronic. I feel like it, obviously because of the sound font and the driver used, it stands very much to the side of the one that I'd played, but like I got real like early electronic vibes out of it. I really liked the quality of the toms.
Those rolling toms sound really good.
Yeah. I thought that they I don't know what they reminded me of, but they reminded me of something likely from the 80s.
I got Pretty Hate Machine vibes, actually.
Oh, okay.
Like the beginning of like Head Like a Hole.
Yeah. I can see that too. But it's funny because on our most recent episode of the Arcane Machine, you played something by Kraftwerk, and like it's just the only thing I couldn't get out of my head. I'm just like, this doesn't sound like Kraftwerk, but this reminds me of Kraftwerk.
Yeah, I can kind of see that. It's got a kind of like that robotic electronic feel to it. It's funny, I love like the richness of all the synths and the drums, and then those guitars come in and it's like, oh, that's a little cringe, guys.
Yeah.
MIDI guitars were always really difficult to do with, even like, especially on general MIDI, but even like the Roland Sound Canvas, which has a really good sound font, guitars are always lacking, unless you really were like a Tim Fallon kind of aficionado or a savant with these kind of things. It's difficult to make those sound good. And I could tell what they were going for, and I always kind of wished that those were actual like real chuggy guitars in there. Yeah. I think it would make it sound really good, but they approximated what they wanted, I think, the best they possibly could. So, but it just reminds you, oh, it's MIDI, yes. But yeah, I do. I really like this track. I like the fact that it's got those really sweeping kind of synths underneath that B section, and then towards the end, there's like the low male choral synth at the bottom there. So just a lot of very rich stuff underneath all of the higher end kind of arps and twinklies and stuff. So there's a nice breadth of sound, a very wide soundscape in this particular track, which you don't find a lot in MIDI. So somebody knew what they were doing. Speaking of those somebodies, let's talk a little bit about the composers. Many of these composers have long and storied careers well after their time with the Descent series. First off, Brian Luzietti. He was the lead composer and audio director on the game. Graduated with a bachelor's degree in music composition from the University of Colorado, Denver. Has a degree in advanced studies in scoring for motion pictures from the University of Southern California. He was music director at Interplay from 1993 to 1998, and then audio director at Visual Concepts from 1998 to 2006. He now works as an independent multimedia audio consultant for the last 16 years. Some notable games he's worked on include Clay Fighter, Out of This World, Wolfenstein 3D, Fallout, Baldur's Gate, and most of the NFL and NBA 2K games from 2000 all the way to 2007.
Wow.
So a lot of AAA titles there.
Yeah, what a resume.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, we'll follow that up. Ken Allen. He started at Sierra in 1989, composing for Thexter 2 and the Space Quest series. I'm familiar with Space Quest, not so much Thexter.
No, me neither. I never really heard of that.
So he joined Tsunami Media in 1992, where he composed and produced 2 Ringworld games, Revenge of the Patriarch and Return to Ringworld. He joined Interplay in 94 when he worked on Descent and also produced the CD-ROM version of Star Trek Judgment Rights. And finally, he joined Westwood Studios to produce and compose for Nox and the MMO game Rift.
Yeah, it's funny. I was reading a little bit about Ken Allen, and he was a huge Ringworld fan. And his one stipulation, if he was going to get hired onto Tsunami Media, would be to compose and produce 2 Ringworld games. I guess they had already done one, and he really enjoyed the series. And I think they're based on books, right?
I think so.
Pretty sure. And so he definitely, he was like, if you're doing 2 more games in the series, like I want to compose and produce them. And that's where it went.
That's really cool.
Larry Peacock was mostly a sound designer, working with Luzietti on all of the NBA and NFL 2K games titles after the Descent series.
Leslie Spitzer only has Descent titles and a voice editing credit on 1995 Stone Keep.
Yeah, same with Jim Torres and Tim Wiles. I can't find any other credits to their names other than these games. So I think we're looking at mostly Ken Allen and Brian Luzietti doing, the elephant's share of the music for this particular game. As a quick honorable mention, the audio direction and sound effects lead on this title was the prolific and well-respected Charles Deenan, and he was a composer of many British microcomputer games, and he later went on to become sound lead and audio designer for AAA game series like Halo, Call of Duty, Battlefield, Gears of War, a ton more. So I imagine you would need somebody with a lot of talent to be able to manage audio and sound effects coming from 6 different directions instead of just stereophonic doom. You know, here's your imp on the right and here's a soldier on the left. Like, what do they sound like and where are they shooting you from? Now you've got to pretty much be able to get sounds coming from all over the place, and how loud are they, and where do they, how does it sound like they're coming from the top and the bottom versus left and the right. So Deenan probably gained a lot of experience and knowledge from doing that, and probably helped him out later in his career. All right, so let's move on to our next series of music. We're going to talk about the ports and expansions of Descent. First off, talking about the popular, what most people are probably familiar with, the PS1 port, which came out in 1996. Again, this was developed directly by Parallax and published by Interplay. It was mainly, the original music for the game was composed by Allister Brimble, but then Typo Negative and Ogre from Skinny Puppy and Mark Walk, who are now in a band called Ogre, OHGR, composed some of the music as well, and their music is actually originally composed for this game. But I believe the Typo Negative tune is a instrumental version of a song that appears elsewhere.
Yes, I think October Rust.
Yes, yeah, Haunted is on October Rust. It was a Red Book Audio soundtrack on the PC version, and it was compressed XA audio on the PS1 version, for those who care. But anyways, Justin, what did you pick?
I picked the Typo Negative song called Haunted that was on the soundtrack because I love Typo Negative.
Yes, if you're a listener of Arcane Machine, this would come as no surprise to you. So this is going to be the gothiest, dirgiest, most metal song that we're playing tonight.
All right, you're listening to the instrumental and very shortened version of Typo Negative's Haunted. Guarantee you that is the shortest real song by Typo Negative that you will find. They have shorter tracks, but I don't believe there's anything shorter than this that's a song.
Yeah, no, that's probably right. Basically, you take a punk song and slow it way down, and that's a Typo Negative song, and the length would be the same too. But yeah, we were kind of talking as we were listening to this, because both of us have heard this song millions of times, both being Typo Negative fans, and we were just kind of wondering, like, to ourselves, why this song is on this soundtrack. It doesn't fit in with, and even though the PlayStation 1 version of the soundtrack is different from the PC version that we just heard from, the music style is very much the same.
Yeah,
dark, dancey electronic music. And this just sticks out like a undead green thumb, you know?
Yeah. No, Typo Negative is not what I would call dancey. I think some of their songs have some dancey moments, but no, it's very odd. That's one of the many reasons that I picked it. I mean, the top reason is I love Typo Negative, so there you go.
A chance to play it on a VGM show will never appear again, probably.
Exactly. But outside of that, like I also like the song. I like Haunted, and it does stick out like a green zombie thumb, as you said, because it's so slow. It's not like electronic, really. It's just slow doom metal, goth metal. Like it's got to be. If anywhere, it's got to be menu music. Because I do remember, like I said, my friend had this version, the PS1 version, and I do not remember this song ever playing. I mean, I couldn't tell you the specific songs anyway, but if I listen to the soundtrack, I'd be like, oh, I remember hearing this one. And so it's either like ending in the ending somewhere, or it's got to be menu music. Because you can't play to this.
No.
You cannot fly around space in the kind of game that Descent is. Like maybe... like EVE Online or somewhere where you're just like flying and it's going to take you an hour to get somewhere. Yeah, sure. Listen to
right, or like playing like Bloodborne, where the graphics just kind of lend itself to this kind of music. Yeah. I could feel that, or a walking simulator, or something like that. But definitely not Descent. No. Not at all. We will get into the composers after the next track, but let's talk a little bit about the ports and expansions. The North American and Japanese PS1 versions featured some advanced lighting effects and smooth gameplay. Keep in mind, this was a very early PlayStation game. It came out in the long box, so it wasn't a launch title, but it was like within the first year of PlayStation 1 game release. Frame rates could drop and slow down considerably in heated battle. It wasn't completely optimized, but I'd chalk that up to just developers being new and this being kind of a very advanced game to kind of cut your teeth on, especially for Parallax Software, who had not made a PlayStation game before. The PAL version, however, was letterboxed and performed way more poorly. The designers blame this on the fact that the game pushed the PS1 hardware to its absolute known limits at the time. So whatever development kits they had, or the early versions that Sony gave them, this was basically the limit of what they could push out of the PlayStation. So when you move it to the PAL version, which less frames per second, you're like, it's a lot harder to get through.
That's fair.
Yeah.
A modified stereoscopic 3D version of the game was actually released alongside Stereographics Simulize VR 3D glasses. Don't think this was actual VR in terms of head movement, just more of a 3D looking at the screen effect than like putting on the goggles and being able to move around.
Yeah, it was like glasses that had TVs in each lens. So you would see two images that would blend stereoscopically, so it didn't track your head moving or anything like that. So they called it VR, but it wasn't true VR. Yeah. I don't know if I would want to play this game in VR ever.
I mean,
especially not back then with janky frame rates and large polygons. And I mean, I have a VR stomach of steel. Like I use my Quest 2 all the time, and I never ever feel any motion sickness. But when a game does wrong things. Like there's nobody that can survive a poorly made VR game.
Well, how does your body survive or handle the Virtual Boy?
Oh, I'm fine with it. I've never had a problem with it.
Oh, then you might not have a problem. Well, you might not have a problem with this if it weren't Descent. Like as you said, Descent itself is Doom but barfy.
Oh yeah, but I meant if it was true VR.
Oh yeah,
Descent would probably be that game that finally tips my stomach. You know what I mean?
Gotcha. Okay.
There were other ports announced, but later canceled, so this game was originally supposed to come out on the 32X, the Saturn, the 3DO, and the 3DO sequel, the M2. A spin-off game for the N64 called Ultra Descent was also announced, but it never got past the design stage. And the original game was also announced for WiiWare to be released in late 2010, but that's all they did. They announced it, and it never ended up showing up. The moral of the story is Descent does not get along well with Sega or Nintendo.
Apparently not.
No, it's never appeared on a Nintendo or a Sega system.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, the PC version of the game, like Doom, was fully moddable. Gamers could design their own levels, graphics, and enemies. In 1995, Interplay and Parallax collect 123 maps voted as the best by Computer Gaming World magazine and officially released Descent Levels of the World. It also included an all-new level from the game's designers, and the game's source code was released in 1997 for further modding.
Yeah, and that's great.
Yeah.
Because, they were following that trend with Doom where at-home modders were churning out new content for Doom left and right, and that kept people interested in the game and playing the game. And they were trying to do the same for Descent, and because Descent had such freedom of movement, people were able to create new and very complex maps and stuff, and especially for multiplayer, so it really kind of excelled in that. Especially since it was their favorite 123 maps, which is kind of weird. But that just means if that's their favorites, then there were way more than that available. So I can only imagine how many actual maps there are for the original Descent game at this point. The game is actually currently available, so you can play it on Good Old Games and Steam. And because they released the source code in 1997, people have modified the source code of the game to help it run better on modern systems, upgraded graphics, resolution, texture smoothing, etc., etc. So the game still exists. You can still run it without, having to mod too much or start running a Win 95 in a VM or anything like that, which is great. Yeah, it makes it accessible.
Awesome.
So let's move on to our next track. Of course, I'm going to pick the Skinny Puppy track if he's going to pick the Typo Negative track. Actually, I think there were 3 or 4 tracks composed by Ogre and Mark Walk on the Descent. I picked one of them on the Pixel Tunes Radio Industrial Strength VGM episode that I did with Todd from Embassy Exclusive ages and ages ago. So this is a different one. This is called Retzes, again by Ogre and Mark Walk. Welcome back. If you're still with us, I appreciate you. That was Retzes by Kevin Ogilvy, a.k.a. Ogre, and Mark Walk. Yeah, so lots of people, for context, I have a industrial music channel on my VGMbassy Discord server, and very often listeners and friends will post a piece of music and ask, is this industrial? And I should just start saying, did you enjoy listening to it? And if they said yes, I will say, then it's not industrial. Sometimes there's a certain amount of masochism involved with listening to industrial music and still enjoying it. No, there's way more listenable industrial than that. I mean, I love this song and I consider it very listenable, but listening to it with maybe somebody else's ears, I can tell maybe some of you are going, what the hell do we just listen to? What did you think, Justin, before we move on with this?
So I liked it. Overall, I could see this or hear this, I guess, as in-game music. I could see a level being done to this. I could also see if I get lost in that level or if I take too long on that level, it eventually drive me a little bit crazy. For one, the vocals, as an enjoyer of industrial music, I love the vocals. The distorted vocals are really cool. But as a video game player, those are really, really distracting. So if this is in-game music, WTF, guys. And then towards the end, like that floaty synth just felt so random. And I know that's the point. I know that's how they do a lot of their music. But
it sounds like an old style slot machine.
Yeah,
going off that you just won $100 or something like that.
And I was like, it didn't feel like it fit with the rest of the song. So it's one of those things, I call them like musical comedy. It made me laugh.
Yeah.
Because it stood out, but at the same time, like that's as a player, I feel like that would also be distracting. Like you're doing something else. What is that? What is that?
Yeah, no, I totally get that. At least on the PlayStation version, this would have been compressed a little bit, so the tones might have been a little bit softer.
Well, that's fair.
This is taken from the Descent to PC version of the soundtrack, so it's Redbook Audio. Like I said, I enjoy this one. I enjoy... actually, this soundtrack is really, really good. Even the Allister Brimble tracks that are on here are really good, too. They're just more dancey, dark stuff. We'll hear some Allister Brimble later on in the show. I just wanted to give every composer that worked on this series of games their own little spotlight for all their contributions. Considering that we're going to be, talking about Allister Brimble a little bit later on, and we also talked about Allister Brimble a lot on our last episode about Quattro Games, of which he was a large contributor to. Let's talk a little bit about Typo Negative and Ogre and Mark Walk. Why don't you go first?
All right, how much time you got?
No.
So Typo Negative, as I mentioned before, I'm a big fan. They are a band from Brooklyn, New York. They started in 1989. They cover a few different genres. I always think of them as doom metal, and it's funny because Mike, every time without fail, if I call Typo Negative doom metal, my co-host on XVGM always goes, "Are they though?" Yes, Mike. They are doom metal. They are also gothic metal. They are also gothic rock, but they are doom metal. It's on the Wikipedia page, so it must be true.
There you go. Perfect.
But yeah, so they've been around. Well, they were around for a while. They started in 1989 as Repulsion, and they went until 2010 as Typo Negative. They changed their name from Repulsion to Typo Negative, I think, a year later, 1990-1991.
Yeah, they didn't have any official releases under that name.
No. A lot of really good music. It's not all super, super slow and dirgy like that, but a good amount of it is. So they had 7 albums. A lot of the names of these albums are fairly provocative. Their 1991 album is called Slow, Deep, and Hard. Take with that what you will. Their last album in 2007 was called Dead Again, and unfortunately they are no longer a band because their lead singer, Pete Steele, died in 2010. The other band members are Kevin Hickey on guitar and backing vocals, Josh Silver on keyboards, piano, synths and effects, and John Kelly on drums. And Peter Steele, if I didn't say it, he's lead vocals. Like if you ever listen to a Typo Negative song.
And bass, of course.
Yes. Oh, yes, and bass. But I always recognize him not from his bass playing, but from his deep, growly voice.
Yeah. Man, 12 years since he's passed. It still feels like yesterday. Like I literally remember learning about it and feeling really, really upset about it. Jeez.
Same.
Yeah, so Ogre and Mark Walk, at this point, didn't have a name to unify them as a band. Currently, they are known as... It's pronounced Ogre, just like the lead singer's pseudonym, but it's spelled O-H-G-R.
Ogre.
Yes. Nivek Ogre, O-G-R-E, Canadian native, longtime member of the industrial band Skinny Puppy. Mark Walk is a longtime collaborator of Skinny Puppy and producer of their music. Skinny Puppy started off in Canada in the 80s doing really loud, aggressive industrial music. So it was Nivek Ogre, Kevin Key, and Dwayne Gotel. Dwayne passed on, must have been early 2000s, late, maybe 98, 99, something like that. I'm just riffing off the top of my head here. There was a long, long hiatus, and they didn't end up coming back until, I believe, 2005, something like that, with Great or Wrong of the Right, which remains one of my favorite Skinny Puppy albums. So they are still releasing as Skinny Puppy. Ogre and Mark Walk are still releasing as Ogre. So this was kind of like the prototypical, I guess maybe almost demo tracks of Ogre before it ever really came to fruition. And I don't know, these are tracks that don't appear anywhere else. So I don't know if they composed them specifically for this game. I don't know if Mark and Ogre were kind of like talking about doing something together, cut a couple demo tracks, and were like, hey, there's a development company out there that wants some industrial music, and let's sell these tracks. And, you know, I really have no idea how. There isn't a lot of information online about how Typo Negative and Skinny Puppy ended up becoming a part of these soundtracks. But I'm really curious to find out how. Like, was somebody at Parallax a huge goth and was like, you know, let's get these bands in there? Did they have connections somehow? Typo's American and Skinny Puppy's Canadian and Parallax was British, so it's like not even from the same, they wouldn't be like local friends or anything. So anyways, it's just neat they ended up there. Again, I would not have even picked up the Descent series had I not seen Typo Negative and Ogre's name on the back of the PlayStation long box, so that's how it goes, I guess, you know? The PC version of the Descent 2 soundtracks also included the Ogre and the Typo Negative music on their soundtrack, but also had new original music composed by Dan Wentz for the MIDI version of the soundtrack, and then Brian Luzietti, Mark Morgan, Larry Peacock, Tim Wiles, Johan Langley, Ronald Valdez, and Leslie Spitzer on the Red Book audio soundtrack. So let's start listening to some of the Descent 2 music. Justin, what do we have next up?
All right, we're going to listen to the SC55 version of Level 3.
This one was composed by Dan Wentz.
Okay, welcome back. You're listening to Level 3 from Descent 2. This is the MIDI SC55 version, and it was composed by Dan Wentz.
This dude knows MIDI.
Yeah, clearly. Clearly. There was a lot going on there, especially towards the end. I could feel my old 1998 computer slowing down, not from the graphics, but because the sound card is just like, there's too much going on.
Yeah, smoke coming out of your Altec Lansing speakers.
Oh my gosh, so intense.
No, I was just so impressed with this tune. You don't hear MIDI compositions like this usually, and what I really liked about it was the changes in stereo panning, and not only volume, but like in velocity of the notes too. Some notes just hit really hard, and he knew how to bring different instruments up and down to focus on other things. When he had those toms kind of rolling in the background and they would stereo pan left to right, he used an instrument that had a little bit more of a reverb on it, so it sounded like it was further back in the distance. It was like there was spatial panning with MIDI, which is like really difficult to do. I can only imagine, like, I'm sure he had some really good software to work with to be able to manage all of these complexities going on here, all of these instrument commands.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I also liked, just for one, a lot of the sound fonts that he that he used in the beginning. Like that main melody sounded a lot like an organ to me, like an electric organ. And then there was another thing that came in that sounded more like a church organ. Yeah, which was really cool. I did laugh a little at the toms, because the sound for the toms that was used in this reminded me a lot of like the Casio keyboard toms.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Really, really high energy, which was a lot of fun, and in contrast to the last song that I played. So, and then just that build up towards the end, it felt extremely layered, and despite being really chaotic, I mean, if I wanted to focus on or pick out the different instruments, you could. Like, there was enough that you could hear in there that it's not just like a muddled mess.
Right, it still made sense to your ears. Yeah, you could just tell it was just a really intense build-up to what eventually ended up being kind of a slower, like, denouement at the end. It just kind of like... Yeah. But even so, it used a different instrument set than what he was using during the song to kind of fade the whole thing out, so... I was really, really impressed with this composition, and I listened to a little bit when you picked it, and I was like, oh yeah, good tune. I never bothered to like finish the whole thing until now, and I was like, damn man, this is going on my iTunes playlist for sure.
Nice.
Good stuff. So Dan Wentz is no stranger to the Descent series. We'll be hearing his name more as we go throughout. But before we talk about the composers, let's talk a little bit about the game itself. Originally, Descent 2 was planned to be an expanded CD-ROM version of Descent 1, but the game kind of grew out of its own britches, and so they decided to make it its own standalone Descent 2. The graphics were also updated to run at SVGA resolution, so you could now get, true 320 by 240 resolution going on there. Maybe SVGA might have been 640 by 480.
I'm fairly certain 640 by 480 is regular VGA. I think SVGA is
1024 by 768?
I think so.
Okay. All right, something like that.
And Parallax created the Portal engine, no relation to the Portal game, for Descent 1 to run on, and Descent 2 used it as well. So basically, the game maps are broken up into invisible cubes with portals on the borders as you fly between them. The game knows what polygons to render based on which cube you're in, rather than worrying about the whole level all at once. It was very efficient and let the games run on lower spec PCs, and many games after it use similar rendering techniques.
Yeah, so a big flaw in game design before this with polygonal or pseudo-polygonal games is that the computer would be forced to render the entire level and you would move around in it. This was one of the first ones where, you hear nowadays, if you watch Border Break or any of those YouTube channels where they kind of go behind the scenes of games, they're not about culling and how the computer will know how to remove polygons that's not visible to you to save on processor time. to only kind of render what's in front of you at the time so that it looks like a solid 3D world. That Portal engine really kind of pioneered that culling process and only rendering polygons that would be visible to you at the time, especially since you were basically traveling in rooms that are connected by mining tunnels. It was very easy to sit you in a room and say, okay, let's blank out all the other rooms around you, and then when you move through these tunnels, it'll start rendering what's in front of you before that next door opens, which is a technique that almost all games use nowadays. You play Tomb Raider and Lara's got to slowly open a door by pressing the A button really hard. It's rendering that room behind you while you're working at opening that door. So this is kind of the preliminary versions of that. And because of that, Descent and Descent 2 could run very well on low-spec computers, which was something that other 3D games of the time could not boast at all. The other biggest addition to gameplay with Descent 2 was the Guidebot feature. This was a little guy that you can rescue, and then he flies around the stage and kind of lets you know where your next objectives are. A big complaint of Descent 1 was because these stages were so labyrinthine, it would say, okay, you would... Similar to Doom, you would run across a blue door, and you'd need to get the blue badge to open up the blue door. Well, where the heck is that? This Guidebot could show you, guide you towards the key so that you could get there and come back. You didn't have to rescue him and use him if you didn't want to. You could play it old school way. But if you were there to play, the action game and not necessarily find your way around this maze, or you were somebody who didn't want to use the auto map or got disoriented really easily, the Guidebot could definitely set you on your way if you ever got lost.
That's really cool. That's a great feature.
Made it much more accessible for other gamers, that were able to get into it.
So long as it doesn't say, hey, listen, every time.
Hey, loser. That's what it would say. I'm the Guidebot. Where's the next key, you bloke? Anyways, let's listen to level 2. This is the stage before the level you picked. Obviously, 2 is before 3. Get a little punchy, and we're not even a quarter of the way through the show yet? Let's listen to the AW32 Sound Blaster version of this one. We'll be right back. All right, piggies, that was March of the Pigs by Nine Inch Nails. Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, level 2 from Descent 2, composed by Dan Wentz on his magical MIDI machine. So this one was a little more rockin', I think, than Justin's. Justin's was dancier. This one, I think, relied a lot on synth guitars. So not those kind of cheesy-ish guitars that were in that previous one that I picked. This one had more of a chuggy kind of feel, which he used, I think, like the overdriven guitar sound font, kind of harmonized with each other to get kind of a gritty sound to it. What'd you think of this one?
So this one, I feel like, for me, went to a lot of different places. You'd mentioned at the end, we were joking about March of the Pigs by Nine Inch Nails. The very beginning, I got some like Mortal Kombat vibes. I even shouted out Mortal Kombat as a joke. But in the middle, this is what I really like about this track is it could have been 3 different tracks.
Yeah.
But the middle reminded me of some things that I've heard from the Electric Hellfire Club. So I don't know if I played them on Arcane Machine yet, but this basically, exactly, like this was like, I like that song. Oh, I don't think I played that yet. So, now it's giving me ideas for that. But
for sure.
Yeah, it was really cool to hear almost like a natural flow from one thing to the next. I mean, there's a little bit of like a break between, I think, the middle and the Nine Inch Nails part, but that was really cool. And to do all that with MIDI as well.
Yeah, exactly.
The parts that I forgot that it was MIDI.
It's funny because with like that dun 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 dun, like I was like, oh, that's March of the Pigs, and then the drums, the snare hits switched from 2/4 to 1/3, and I was like, no, it's definitely March of the Pigs.
Yes.
I had not heard that before now, and I was like, wow, man, he really changed it up, and he's not pulling any punches there with that similarity. But no, yeah, I agree with you. I thought that it was great. Definitely assuming that the dynamic range of these tracks, and like you said, it could be 3 tracks in one, is on purpose for sure. Because like you said before, with Rat Says, listening to that over and over again while playing a game could get really distracting or monotonous. Whereas when you have music like this, which seems to go through several movements or be multiple pieces in one, to the listener's ear, then you're cycling through these different parts of the song over and over again, and it's not just that one drum beat droning over and over and over again. That's a conscious choice, and it's also the mark of a smart composer, for sure.
Yeah.
So as good as the MIDI soundtrack was, there was also a Redbook audio soundtrack along with this game on the CD-ROM version that was equal in quality, I would say, if not even a little bit better. And there were several composers involved in that. But first, let's talk a little bit about our boy Dan Wentz. He started at Interplay, which was the publisher for Parallax for the Descent series. Right. Parallax, at a certain point, which we'll get to later on in the show, split off into 2 different companies around the time of Descent 3, and one of those companies was Volition. So he moved from an Interplay employee to a Volition employee when that split happened. So altogether, he was working there from 1995 until 2009. He was an audio production supervisor and a composer, and he helped to develop the studio's audio department. After a couple of teaching jobs, he joined the Warner Brothers Entertainment Group and was senior audio designer on Injustice: Gods Among Us, and he moved over to High Voltage Software and worked there from 2014 to 2015. Presently, he's an audio director at Revival Productions, but we will talk more about them later because they are also Descent related. Ooh. So he's, like I said, he's been around for quite a while working on mostly Descent related projects. He's like the definitive Descent sound, I think. He's got that.
Dan Wentz?
Yeah, for sure. You'll hear other music that you'll be like, yeah, that sounds Wentzian, for sure. So we're going to listen to our first Redbook audio piece from Descent 2. Justin, of course, you're first off. What do we got?
Yeah, this will be Techno Industry, and this is composed by Johan Langley. All right, you're listening to Techno Industry by Johan Langley. And as we were just joking, more industry than techno.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. This dude really had a good handle on, well, you know, some people take industrial music literally and just think that it's incorporating sounds of industry into regular music.
I'm one of those people.
Yeah, I think this does do that in a sense, but does it in a way that shows that he also knows what actual industrial music is. Mm-hmm. I feel like the intro and the outro that were very clanky were really well done. They were really, really good beats based on, you know, sound effects from other mechanical creatures, more or less. You know, camera shutter and like mining equipment and stuff. Yeah. It's like stuff that you don't normally see. Like he was using the camera shutter as like hi-hat. So it was like, you know, incorporating different elements into like what a regular drum kit might play, which I really, really liked. And it wasn't just, you know, let's just take a sample of some construction down the road and just, you know, throw it in and try to fit it into our music. This felt much more produced.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, with the chuggy guitars like that, I mean, there's plenty of places you can go, but I knew where it was going. The things that surprised me in it is there's a few times where like you can very clearly hear the bass, and the bass, anytime it's prominent, it just reminds me of Alice in Chains. It sounds a lot like the bass quality from a lot of their songs. So I liked it. I just thought that was really neat, and disconcerting is not the right word. It was just like a weird, almost like discord in my head because they work really well together, but when the bass was prominent, it felt more Alice in Chains, and when the bass wasn't prominent, it was just like almost like something you would hear in from the Doom soundtrack. Like it's very hard, like metal industrial.
I was getting way more like Sasha Dikisian's Quake 2 soundtrack.
Okay, yeah.
For sure. Program beats with metal guitars over it and some industrial interlays here and there.
Yeah.
So formulaically, if you describe that, you could say, oh, you're describing the Quake 2 soundtrack. But this did have it had a more garagey kind of production to it. Not to say that it like garagey doesn't mean sloppy for me. Right. It had a more raw production to it for sure, while the Quake 2 soundtrack was a bit more stylized. So I really enjoyed this. I thought that was a really good track. Different from a lot of the stuff that we've been listening to lately too. So it incorporated a lot of that metal and rock into the industrial stuff.
For sure.
Sweet. So let's talk a little bit about the ports and expansions of Descent 2. In 1996, a Windows 95 update to the original DOS version was released called Descent 2: The Infinite Abyss. And this was one of the first games to support early graphics cards like the S3 Verge, the ATI Rage, and the Matrox Mystique cards, later adding support for the powerful and venerable 3DFX series of cards. Which, you know, when I was like a teenager, I thought 3DFX would be around forever. I'd be on like Voodoo 73 by now, but ATI and GeForce ended up taking over, you know, NVIDIA. It also packed in the separately available Vertigo series. This contained a new multiplayer game mode, new enemies, and new music. It also included the Mission Builder, which was an enemy and level creator, and contained a tool, which was really awesome, that could convert maps from the original Descent 1 game into the Descent 2 format, which was fantastic.
That's cool.
Yeah, because then you could take all those maps and upgrade them to Descent 2, and then you could play your favorite Descent 1 maps in the higher resolution and 3D accelerated. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
Yeah. In 1997, the PlayStation 1 version was released. They called it Descent Maximum, and it's built on the Descent 2 framework, but contains 36 new levels and FMV sequences not included in the PC game.
And like Descent 1, you can currently get it on Steam, and similar to Descent 1 as well, they released the source code in 1998, and that has helped modders enhance the graphics and keep the game running on modern PCs. I love when developers kind of like say, okay, we're not going to support this game anymore, but we're going to give you the tools for you to support it. Yeah. As long as you want to play this game, we're going to give you the tools so that you'll be able to play it, take the source code, do whatever you want with it. You know, it's great. Okay, so these two tracks that we're in the middle of right now are from the CD-ROM version of Descent 2 and also the aforementioned soundtrack to the PlayStation 1 Descent Maximum game. So this included lots of really good techno-industrial stuff. We're going to listen to Cold Reality. This was composed by Brad Cross, Larry Peacock, and Leslie Spitzer. Welcome back to Cold Reality. That was Cold Reality. Composed by Brad Cross, Larry Peacock, and Leslie Spitzer, 3 of our dozen composers on Descent 2. Very different feel, obviously, being different composers from Justin's pick. A little more dancey, a little less aggressive.
At first I was thinking, like, this feels more atmospheric, but the more I think about it, the more I want to say maybe trancy. It's definitely dancey, but it I don't know, it feels, a lot of the stuff that we've been listening to so far has been a bit more on the aggressive side, and this felt far less aggressive, and that's not a knock against it. It's just like we have like a tonal shift. But this one does something that I like to do when I compose like techno and dancey stuff, especially years ago, like when I started playing around with software like that, where you kind of build this idea in the beginning and then you have this other idea. So you slowly like introduce instruments and fade out instruments. So like it kind of shifts from like this one idea to the other, but sort of organically, because you'll have all these things going on, and then you'll have this instrument that's kind of quiet and starts to build, and as other instruments are fading out, and like one by one, and then it just kind of like replaces the set of instruments.
Yeah, they complement each other, but then they're also able to stand on their own.
Yeah, and I really like that.
Yeah, me too. Especially with music like this, because you're talking about like a dancey beat. I think I hear this a lot in like the dance metal or the the more like dancey industrial stuff. Is you'll get heavy guitars, but then you'll also get these synths like you have in this song. And doing that whole fade in, fade out that you were talking about works really well, because the guitars sound so different from the synths, but they also work well together, so that when you have them both going at the same time, it sounds good. But when you have them each separately, when you have just the synth, suddenly it's a dance song. When you have just the guitars, suddenly it's like a rock song with a dancey beat. It helps change the genre of the music, but also fade between the genres without sounding out of place or jarring. So I think you hit the nail on the head of why I like this song so much, is that it does flow between those very related genres quite well.
Yeah.
Listening to this song on its own, it's not as punchy, or I don't think is as exciting to the ears as your selection, but I think this is a great song to do stuff to. Like, this song feels really good while you're playing this game.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to sound really good if you're like, driving a car while listening to this podcast. It's going to be like your whole yard's on fire if you're mowing the lawn while listening to this song. It just kind of, it's like a life enhancer kind of a music. It's got a big driving beat to it, and it's in a key that like sits nicely in the background, but also allows you to think about what you're doing. It doesn't have lots of crazy stuff going on that's distracting. So I think that's why I liked it so much, because I was watching a YouTube like long play of Descent 2 while this was on in the background. I was like, whoa, this really rocks. And listening to it now on its own, I'm like, it's less impactful, but I still really, really like it. So I have a feeling, usually I listen to my own podcast while I'm driving in the car, and so I'll be like bopping along, wanting to get on the highway and realizing that I don't drive on highways ever, so with my 4-mile drive to work. Anyways, a little bit about the composers, because so many of them also worked on the last game, and we talked about them. The new composers being the Brad Cross, Larry Peacock, Leslie Spitzer team, as well as Johan Langley. Johan Langley worked at Interplay from 1994 to 1998. Some notable games he worked on while he was there was Monty Python's Complete Waste of Time, which I had back in the day. It was a lot of fun. Nice. Atomic Bomberman and Red Asphalt.
I've heard of all of those games, actually. Ronald Valdez is another one that is new to this list, and he's a longtime Interplay employee. Went from 1992 to 2014, mostly music and voiceover editing jobs, but a few music credits besides Descent 2, those being Blood and Magic, Mario Teaches Typing 2, Descent to Undermountain, Baldur's Gate, and Max 2 Mechanized Assault and Exploration. He spent the last 14 years of his tenure with Interplay working on the Baldur's Gate and Icewind Dale series as a music editor.
Yes, sir. So you mentioned Descent to Undermountain, which was another Interplay game, and I think we kind of briefly touched on this as we were talking about the show, but Descent to Undermountain was a dungeon crawler RPG that used the Descent game engine.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Was not very good. Evidently, Interplay was like, well, we own, Parallax Software created this engine. We own the rights to use it as we see fit now. We think it's a great 3D engine. We want to adapt it to be a RPG. For some reason, they wanted to, make an RPG out of it. And the developers were like, this is not really suited for, like, dungeon crawling RPG stuff. Like, it can move polygons around, but it's really not. And so they had a very difficult time with it, and the RPG was kind of janky, and it didn't get very good reviews. I listened to the music, and it was, I was almost going to use it as kind of like a little side quest to play something from it on the show, but I couldn't find anything from it that was really... I couldn't really find much about the game that was really interesting to talk about, besides what I just said. And B, the music was like really kind of mediocre medieval stuff. It didn't feel like a lot of effort was put into it, so... but it's a fun little side story, just showing, maybe this engine. It's great for Descent-style games, but maybe not as versatile as Interplay had originally thought it was.
Yeah.
But it does show how invested they were in it, that they wanted to use it and thought that it could be used for other things. Mm-hmm. I thought that was kind of cool. All right, so next up, we're going to take, as I was just talking about, a little side quest. We're going to play a track from a game that is not technically related to Descent, but heavily like it could have been a Descent game if you just changed the title screen. You may be familiar with the N64 or the PlayStation 1 game Forsaken. This was released in 1998 and developed by Probe and published by Acclaim, so nothing to do with Parallax or Interplay at all. The music was composed by Dominic Glynn and Stephen Root, who called themselves collectively The Swarm. And we're going to listen to Volcano. This was released... This is the PC/PS1 version of the soundtrack. The N64 music was sequenced and was very different from this version. And it's not good. All right, you just heard Volcano, released on the PS1, the PC, and N64 in 1998. That was composed by Dominic Glynn and Stephen Root, a.k.a. The Swarm. Not to be confused with the video game of the same name.
Oh, I was going to not to be confused with the faction of the same name from StarCraft.
Oh, yeah, you're right, too.
Swarm.
Yep.
So many swarms out there.
I know.
Be confused with the swarm of bees in your backyard.
Oh, no! Not the bees.
But yeah, this game, I actually don't have much recollection of, more than likely because I was not so much a PC gamer back in those days. I had a Mac, so it really only the things that came out cross-platform, which surprisingly Descent, and then a lot of the Blizzard games like Warcraft and StarCraft and all that were what I was into. So this game completely not on my radar, but pretty cool track. I don't have any major notes. It felt very much like video game background music, but like industrial video game background music, which is weird because industrial is not the type of music to be put in the background of anything.
Yeah.
So like they
it's
accomplished something there.
Yeah, it's well produced, I think.
Yes.
But again, kind of similar to I think my last pick is that it sounds great while you're doing stuff, like you said, background music. What's funny and what I picked out about this is I can tell you 99% certainty that this piece of music, probably this whole soundtrack, was created using Sony Acid Pro Studio. Because most of the instruments used and the samples are samples that came with Sony Acid Pro as their sample pack, which I used to create lots of songs when I was probably around the same time that this game came out. So it's funny hearing a lot of those like drum beats and stuff like kind of edited differently and then put into the song.
Yeah.
I thought that was a lot of fun. But and that's also the software that I use to edit this podcast. So it's like Acid Pro Inception going on here.
Wild.
Yeah. Again, like I said, I listened to the N64 version of the soundtrack and it's thematically the same, but the music is different and the samples are really low quality. Again, with these Descent-style games, they use a lot of hardware and resources because there's just so much stuff going on, so many calculations the game needs to do to physics and trajectory and momentum, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So with the N64, you had less processing power for your music if you use lots of processing power in your games. And so therefore they had to reuse low memory samples and everything. So it just sounds like a kind of a muffled mess, not nearly as rich and well produced as the music on this version is. Yeah, the soundtrack is good. It's got some really good stuff in it. This was one of my favorites just because, like I said, I could tell a lot of these samples are nostalgic for me. So it might be a little like rose-tinted glasses here.
Fair.
But I did have a lot of fun listening to it. Stephen Root and Dominic Glynn have a lot of credits to their name. First, we'll talk a little bit about Forsaken itself, the gameplay and the development. The game was developed by Probe Entertainment during the 1996 to 1998 period. At the same time, the company was being merged into its parent company, Acclaim.
Yep, and due to the heavy technology focus of the game, it was often bundled with hardware to show off the cards and was used as a benchmark for many years after the initial release of the game.
Yeah, they actually had a benchmark demo you can download. So when you got a new graphics card or upgraded your RAM or whatever, you could download the Forsaken benchmark and it would run a sample like a non-playable sample version. Like the camera would run through the stages and stuff and lighting effects would go off and it would, show you your frame rate and that would be an indicator of how fast your system was. So I don't think I ever played the game on PC, but I remember running that benchmark a lot because I would upgrade my hardware and see where I was going. The single player mode has 4 difficulty modes: easy, normal, hard, and total mayhem. Each has progressively stronger enemies and less ammo to spare. It was really, really hard on the hardest mode, Total Mayhem. So Acclaim provided a patch that, among other things, decreased the difficulty of the game dramatically. So they literally made the game impossible to beat. Which I'm sure speedrunners now could probably get through it no problem, but before the days of YouTube videos and slowing stuff down and everything, there were a lot of complaints online about how difficult this game was.
Yeah, 22 missions, each requiring the player to either destroy all enemy ships in a maze of tunnels or achieve a certain target, such as completing the level within a time limit or certain percentage of enemies being destroyed, kind of like Star Fox 64, where different paths would appear depending on which one of the targets was achieved.
Yep, the gameplay was nearly identical to Descent, and many reviewers called that out explicitly. And Forsaken stood apart because it was heavily narrative, while Descent barely had any story at all, save for the intros and the endings. So the player would come upon like rooms that would have different set pieces, vehicles and stuff like that, and then you would get constant chatter from your handler and tell you about different plot points, where you need to go, storyline, etc., etc. So you always had this kind of background about what's going on. Whereas, like with Descent, you would get a little cutscene, maybe a paragraph of text. Hey, you've got to destroy all the virus-infected mining machines at this level. Literally the same thing every single level, but they would change it up a little bit. Yeah, so with Forsaken, you were kind of in the middle of the story as you were playing through this stuff. So it kept the player more engaged, I think. Unfortunately, because, the game was reviewed very well on all systems. It ran great on all the systems. And because of this whole probe kind of being disintegrated, and most of the probe team was sprinkled around to either all the other Acclaim development houses or just decided not to go with Acclaim and left, there was really nobody else left to make Forsaken. So it was a game that I think reviewed well enough and sold well enough to get a sequel and or a subsequent series, but just kind of died right there just because the people that developed it were kind of like gone, unfortunately. Let's talk a little bit about the Swarm.
Yeah, so Dominic Glynn, fairly prolific person, he arranged the theme to Doctor Who's 23rd series and or season, depending on if you are British or American. And this was, for those who know, this was the 6th Doctor, Colin Baker's era, which is pretty cool. Colin Baker, not the most popular of the Doctors, but not the least. I don't.
But it was a very cool synth pop version of the soundtrack, for sure.
Yeah, he's composed for many British movies and BBC series, like a Scottish anti-Trump documentary from 2011 called You've Been Trumped, and its follow-up, A Dangerous Game. As a regular writer for Universal Music Publishing Group and other production music libraries, his music is featured in episodes of The Simpsons, Red Dwarf, another British TV show, episodes, Homeland, The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, and Erie, Indiana. Wow, I remember Erie, Indiana.
Yep.
Yeah, game-wise, aside from Forsaken, he contributed music to the RC car racing game Revolt, and he is also part of the electronica duo Syzygy, and owns No Bones Records.
Yeah, it's cool because the Forsaken soundtrack was actually released on CD on No Bones Records. His partner, Stephen Root, started as the head of audio at Acclaim in 1995 after earning a degree in music at Goldsmiths University of London, and while there he worked on games like Batman Forever, Alien Trilogy, and Extreme G. He left Acclaim in 2000 to become audio head at the newly formed Criterion Games, where he worked on the Burnout series. That's where I know him from, because I was a huge Burnout fan. The music in that game is fantastic, so Stephen Root's, I think I've played some of his music on previous VGM podcasts. Electronic Arts bought Criterion in 2004, so he became the senior audio director at Electronic Arts, continuing to compose music for the Burnout series and direct their audio department there. And from 2008 to the present, he's been working at Codemasters, first as an audio director up until 2012, and then vice president of Development Creative Services. While there, he's composed music and produced titles like the F1 series, the Dirt series, and perhaps his most famous title, International Cricket 2010.
Oh, man.
BAFTA award winner. No, obviously that's a little tongue-in-cheek there. Yeah, but between these two gentlemen, the Swarm collectively has a lot of experience, a lot of recognition, a lot of awards behind them. So two really prolific and talented gentlemen on this soundtrack. All right, so I think that's enough Forsaken. Have we forsaken enough?
Sure. Let's move on to the next game.
Yeah, let's move on to Descent 3. This was released on PC and Mac in 1999. This was developed by Outrage Entertainment and published by Interplay. The music was entirely composed by Jerry Berlinghieri, and the music was strictly Red Book audio. By this point, they were like, nope, no MIDI for us, no need for that. And you've got the first song from the soundtrack. What are we playing?
So this is going to be Failsafe, Mercenary Level 2, from the Mercenary expansion of Descent 3, and composed by Jerry Berlinghieri.
mix, 2315 heavy.
Hey there, you're listening to Failsafe, Mercenary Level 2 from the Mercenary expansion of Descent 3, composed by Jeremy Berlongeri.
Jeremy Bearimy.
That's...
This song was one Jeremy Bearimy long.
That's the next one's not much better. But yeah, no, this was neat. I don't know how else to say it. So it fooled me kind of in the beginning when I first listened to the song, and it did the same thing to me again when it started here, because there's those like radio clips that are kind of in the beginning there. It sounds like somebody like talking over CB radio or something, and I like the idea of that. I mean, doing that over and over for like 7 minutes, maybe not so much, but I wish they had interspersed them a little bit more. But I would say that like the main reason I kind of latched onto them and the main reason that like I liked them is because they remind me of some of the music and some of the bits from another PlayStation 1 game called Future Cop LAPD that I just happened to
I remember
enjoy.
that soundtrack. Yeah, that's very 90s like electro stuff, right?
Yeah. But when you're playing the game, there's a lot of like there's people over a CB like your handler and whatnot, but there's also like you hear other things that they in as well. So it just like it reminded me of that. And then of course, they drop it after like the first 5 seconds and I'm like, oh, I want more radio, ham radio. But the other thing is in the beginning portion, there's this like buzzer sound, and every time I hear it, all I can think of is like a speak and spell, like you got something wrong, like so.
Now try again.
Yeah, so that makes me laugh a bit, but overall, like it's kind of just a like a slower, repetitive, pseudo-industrial.
Yeah, well, remember, harkens back to Arcane Machine, but I played a lot of that slowcore / doomcore stuff, and this very much fits in that. It's like techno, but really slowed down and a little bit more. It incorporates dancey elements, but it's like if you were dancing to it, you'd be kind of just like stomping in slow motion around the dance floor.
Yeah.
So for the sake that we're playing so much music in this podcast, and we're obviously going to be going a little bit longer than usual, this song and the next song are 7 and 10 minutes respectively, so I'm going to edit them down and truncate them a little bit, especially with this one because it's I love it.
Yeah.
Great beat. It's got some great parts that come in and out, but you don't need to listen to all 7 minutes to hear everything it has to offer. So some of the repetitive parts will kind of edit and truncate into a more digestible version.
Yeah.
I think I can probably get this down to about 3 or 4 minutes and still you get the full experience of the song.
Yeah, I think like a lot of the other stuff that we've played, it's very much it works much better when you're playing the game, because if you're doing the same thing or you're searching, you're going around this maze, you're not going to be focused on like how long and repetitive the song is. It's going to last for a long time and kind of keep you in the game.
Yeah, for sure, exactly. I feel like these were songs that were composed to probably maybe even last you the amount of time it takes to get through this level, so you don't hear so much repetition going on. But that said, I like it. It's got a great beat. The warbly kind of bass that kind of sits in between the percussion sounds really good. And then these like choral, again, these were more like female choral vocals that came in and out that I thought contrasted really well with that kind of dancey cold beat. So good stuff for sure. Jerry Belongeri's got a very interesting take on the Descent soundtrack, I think very different than what we've been hearing before. As far as gameplay and development goes, not too much has changed since the original Descent came out. You're still the Material Defender, still working for the Post-Terran Mining Corporation, still destroying infected ships and mining drones around sites in the solar system. This one does take a little bit of a turn, though, when you find out that the Post-Terran Mining Corporation might not be as benevolent as they are made out to be.
Gasp.
Giant corporation? Not good? Dun, dun, dun.
What is this, a cyberpunk thriller? So 2 additional ships are unlockable in this game. One is slower but has more firepower, and the other one is, you might guess it, faster and more nimble but with lighter weapons.
Yeah, I think that probably adds a lot to the gameplay as well, gives you a little more control over. Because before it's like you can pick up other weapons, you can pick up missiles and stuff, but you didn't really have any control over how your ship behaves. And so this one gives the players a little more freedom to choose what their strengths and weaknesses are going to be. So although this game was developed by Outrage and not Parallax, that doesn't mean that the project was outsourced or sold to some lowest bidder to churn out shovelware. Parallax Software, as I was talking about before, split into 2 companies. So they became Outrage and Volition as Descent 2 wrapped up. And Volition started working on a game called Descent Free Space, while Outrage turned their sights onto Descent 3. So Descent 3, while being developed by technically a different development company, is still made up of the same people that call themselves Outrage.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as Descent 1 and 2 employed about 8 people or so on the dev team, Descent 3, the development team grew to 20 people as the game demanded just more brains and specialized talents.
Yeah, and they were talking about in interviews that I was reading that it was really difficult to suddenly start managing this growing team while also building this game at the same time. And they were running into, personnel challenges and space challenges and networking challenges that they didn't even think about because they were just kind of adding people as they needed them, not even knowing how big their team was eventually going to grow by the time this whole thing was done. So it produced a lot of other behind-the-scenes challenges that didn't even relate to the, physical development of the game. This was also one of the first games to require a 3D accelerator card to play. So gone were the days of software rendering. You had to have a 3D card in your computer in order to play this game. Of course, today that sounds, no big deal. You want to play a game, you need a 3D accelerator card. That's just how it is. But remember, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, 3D cards were in existence and they were out there, but they were much, much less proliferated than they were nowadays. And there were people that were gamers on PC out there that still did not have 3D accelerator cards because lots of their games still used software rendering. So there was a section of gamers that were alienated from playing this game. And, it might have encouraged people to go out and get 3D accelerator cards. Definitely a controversial choice, even among the team members. Some of them, like the management, wanted to do 3D only or, accelerator only, and some of them wanted to keep it with software rendering. But in the long run, it allowed them to develop the game specifically with high-resolution assets and to use graphics pipelines that they wouldn't have to, wouldn't be using with a software rendering. So it made the game perform better with 3D accelerator cards than if they kind of made a hybrid software / accelerator version. So in the end, in hindsight, now that everybody can play it with a 3D accelerator card, the game looks great. I mean, you watch footage of Descent 3 on YouTube now, even at 1999 resolutions, it really holds up. It looks like a fantastic game. So I think they made the right choice there.
Yeah, this game also featured outdoor environments, allowing for a less tunnely, samey experience from the previous games. Outrage needed to create a flight sim-esque engine for the outdoor areas, combining it with their enhanced Portal engine. Altogether, the package was named the Fusion Engine.
I like how they did that.
Yeah.
So I guess they took their, their Microsoft Flight Sim experience and kind of peppered it in with the Descent experience and kind of mooshed it into a gameplay engine sandwich, more or less. Chocolate and peanut butter. But the outdoor areas are cool, and it does, when you are so used to flying around tunnels and rooms and then you finally get to your first outdoor area, it's like, it almost feels like you're going outside in real life because it's just such a different kind of breath of, like, you can just go up infinitely. Like, where the hell am I going? It's not something that you're used to in a Descent game for sure. So let's move on to our next track. So we're going to play an excerpt from the third level from Descent 3. This one is called Research, again composed by Jerry Belongeri.
MD-1032. We'll monitor your position from orbit until you get back outside. and they seem to be continuing the investigation of Dr. Schweitzer's old laboratory. Keep your head down in there. Dispatch out. Is still active in the system and has generated a sort of mutated robot. Be careful in there. Destroy this thing and get the rest of that research from the terminal.
Oh my goodness, that was Research Level 3 from Descent 3 by Jerry Belongieri. My favorite song of the show so far. Like I said, it's 10 minutes long in total, but there's lots of parts where it's kind of ambient, or there's radio chatter coming in and out. So I'm going to figure out some way to present this in a way that you guys get all the good meaty parts of the song, and maybe I'll play the full version underneath as a music bed. Or, of course, if you're on the Discord, if you're on Twitter, whatever, just tweet at me if you want a link to the full versions of some of these songs that we're truncating. Let me know, and I can either supply you like an MP3 or direct you to a YouTube version of, the full-length version of the song if you're interested.
There you go.
And I would love to know if you enjoy these songs as well, of course, so let me know about that. Any standout moments of this track for you, sir?
So aside from, again, the radio clips, which, as we were discussing during the break, may have... They originally sound, in this, they're a lot more clear, so they sound like sci-fi movie samples from like the 50s, but there's a bit in the middle that it sounds like they're actually giving instructions that are relevant to things going on in the game.
Yeah.
So it's very likely that they were just recorded and made to sound like they were sci-fi samples. But I feel like there were a number of samples of things in here, and if they weren't, then things were really well put together in a way that makes me feel certain things, because there's parts where like it gets quieter, and the background music, background noise, whatever you want to call it, sounds very much like the just background noise on the bridge of the USS Enterprise, the original Captain Kirk.
Okay, definitely.
As we were listening to it, I was like, is that like that beep that I know from like the science station? So that really kind of made my ears perk up, just because it's a nostalgic thing. I thought that the guitar effects they were using were really, really nifty, because it's not just like one effect throughout the entire thing. There was like, they're doing like a call and response thing with different guitar effects.
Yeah.
Which I just thought that was something that I don't really hear often.
Yeah, of course. And, like random French horn rolls
they
that
sounded
would
like
come
they were
in.
MIDI too. Like that felt a little bit out of place, because everything else felt real, but the horns felt like they were MIDI to me.
That was an interesting choice, but everything else, like there was some funky ass bass in there, some great beats. It would kind of come in and out, and they would have like variations on the beat as well as the accompanying instruments. Super, super well produced. I mean, this whole thing was, like I said, one of my favorite tracks that we've played so far on the entire show. This dude started in 1994 as a sound designer at Media Station, and then later became the audio director / composer at Outrage in 1997. By the time he left in 2003, Outrage had been purchased by THQ. In inclusion to Descent 3, he also composed for the PS2 game Alter Echo. He became the studio audio director at Treyarch in 2004 until 2009. If they sound familiar to you, they are known for creating the Call of Duty series, on which he worked as a sound designer and a senior sound designer. It's a lot of sound designing. After that, lots of audio director jobs at Activision Blizzard, Microsoft Game Studio, and Take-Two Interactive. He became an assistant professor at Berklee College of Music in 2018 until just last year. As of 2019, he's the audio lead at Insomniac Games. So again, very talented. You can tell just by this track here, he knows what he's doing. He knows how to create a cinematic soundscape that takes you on a journey to different places and feeds you different ear treats. Yeah. Definitely understand why he's been working on all these AAA titles and teaching at esteemed colleges of music, etc., etc. So let's talk a little bit about the ports.
Yeah, so Descent 3 Mercenary was actually released in 1999, and it's an expansion pack that includes a new series of missions, multiplayer maps, and a level editor, and that's the track that I played was from that expansion. But after its release on Microsoft Windows, the game was also ported to Mac OS and Linux platforms. Yeah,
so this one didn't see any releases on home consoles at all, PC specific. I think that makes sense because of its development strictly for 3D accelerator cards. Right. I don't think home consoles were just capable of running something like this in 1999 at that point. Maybe Dreamcast, but probably wasn't doing well enough in the market to port that over. Maybe as a Windows CE built game, but even like the Windows CE Dreamcast games didn't perform as well as the natively developed Dreamcast games, so probably wasn't even a thought there at all. So we've got a few more games to get through, 2 free space games, and then our last couple tracks, which are going to blow you away for sure. Anyways, we're going to start off with the Free Space series. This is Free Space The Great War, released on PC and Amiga in 1998. So this was the game that was developed by Volition after Parallax split into Volition and outrage. The 2001 Amiga version was developed by Hyperion Entertainment, and we're going to hear some Dan Wentz Red Book audio here instead of just his MIDI compositions. So let's see how he's grown in the past 5 years.
Yeah.
What do you got first?
So this is going to be Dark Side from Descent Free Space The Great War, composed by Dan Wentz.
Right on.
Hey, you're listening to Dark Side from Descent Free Space The Great War, composed by Dan Wentz.
What a change in tone, huh?
Very much so. We were actually just talking, it sounds like, we heard Dan before, and it was, MIDI composition, and even with this being Red Book audio, this still sounds like it's a MIDI composition. Not to take away from it, saying like, it's not live instruments, but it is a different sound, both musically and sound font. I was going to say MIDI-ly. That's not a word. But it's also a different sound.
Sound fontily.
Yes, sound fontily. Jesus. Yes. But, I mean, both a different sound musically. Like, this sounds more orchestral and bombastic to me, but also a different sound as far as the instruments that are being used just in general. Like, this actually kind of reminded me of some of the music from the Soul Calibur series.
Oh, okay. Yeah, definitely. I hear that now. Soul Calibur's got that definitely, like, heroic kind of a thing. Yeah. This feels more like... it's called Dark Side, so it probably is like the evil aliens encroaching or something. It's got like a Star Wars Empire theme, kind of a feel to it, da 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 da, but a little less dynamic, I guess. I'm not going to say that I didn't like this piece. Of the Dan Wentz compositions we've heard so far, it's not on the top. Okay. I like his MIDI stuff was just so dynamic and went so many places. I think, this is probably more of a cinematic cutscene kind of a thing, or maybe gameplay. This game, we can get into the gameplay a little bit, I guess. It doesn't play at all like Descent does, so it probably requires a different type of soundtrack and musical direction. So it was known as Conflict Free Space in Europe, and it revolves around a common enemy theme. So the humans have been at war with this alien race called the Vasudans for 14 years, and this immensely powerful foe called the Shivans appears and threatens to easily take out both factions. So the humans and the Varudans team up to fight them. So it almost feels like a Star Trek Borg kind of a situation, where now it's like, Starfleet and the Romulans team up to fight the Borg or something like that.
Yeah. The game is Star Wars or Wing Commander-style space battles against battalions of smaller ships and huge Star Destroyer-sized vessels. The game has smooth, fast graphics and an intuitive ship interface that made the game accessible for both action and strategy gamers.
Yeah, they wanted you to feel like the pilot, and they wanted you to feel like you were an experienced pilot. So they wanted to make the user interface feel as fluid as they could, so you could kind of like jump right in and just kind of know what everything does. Because that was a problem that a lot of gamers had with like Wing Commander or some of those similar style games that came before it, where it would be like really difficult to figure out how to start playing, and that would turn a lot of gamers off. So these guys being from Parallax, having a lot of game design under the belt already, and spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to make a complex game simple, like obviously they had that focus. So that was a big thing that a lot of reviewers would point out, is that if you had played Wing Commander or a similar game in the past and got frustrated with the controls, still try this out, because you're going to have a better experience with that kind of a thing. Yeah. So there's multiple types of crafts that you can pilot, and lots of customization in both ship configuration and also your HUD. You can configure where things are on your screen, so you can either click or use different hotkeys to do different functions, so you can really make the game feel as natural and as logical to play as your brain wants to think.
That's really handy, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
I like
so if
that.
you're a first-person shooter player and you're used to changing your weapons with like 1, 2, 3 across the top of the screen, you want to change them up there, great. If you want to use your number pad, do that. If you want to just use the mouse wheel to scroll up and down, you can do that. It was really, really intuitive. And there's an expansion pack called Silent Threat that was later released, and this details the events that happen after the game, in which the humans and the Vasudans try to maintain a terse relationship while attacking the weakened remains of the Shivans. So it kind of continues the storyline after the victory march at the end of the original game. So it sold well enough to have both an expansion pack and a sequel. So I assume that the positive reviews it got really turned into some good sales for them. Let's listen to one more track. This is my pick from the game. This is called Marauder. Not as cinematic, but I think you'll still see a little bit of that in this one. Again, this is composed by Dan Wentz. All right, welcome back. That was Marauder from Descent Free Space, The Great War released in 1998 on PC and later on in 2001 on the Amiga. And that was composed by Dan Wentz. Different sound.
Yeah, a bit, yeah.
Interesting sound. Like, this is not my favorite soundtrack of the Descent soundtracks. I don't know why things just sound kind of dissonant to me with this. What was your impression of this one?
I mean, I like this one. Like you said, different sound, very much so, because we went from a very orchestral piece to a very electronic piece. And I don't know, I like it. I think you called out at the beginning, like that fat bass that he's using, and I really enjoyed that, but I enjoyed just all the pieces together. It felt like, it simultaneously felt calming and I wouldn't say nerve-wracking, but like definitely ramping up. Like this feels like you're either trying to get away from something and keeping to the shadows, or like trying to keep out of sight, or you're looking for something, and like you something you need to find to succeed or die.
Oh, okay. So like you've just popped like 2 Xanax, and then a serial killer breaks into your house. So like you're terrified, but you're kind of relaxed. You're just like, holy crap, I'm gonna die. This is how my life ends. Yeah. Yes.
More or less. Yes.
This is the Xanax serial killer song. I was telling you, like the B section of the song has that like that synth line with that really slow attack, and it sounded like bagpipes to me. So I was telling you about this cyborg Highlander that I had in my head, this half robot dude playing bagpipes as the sea beams glint over whatever the that last speech from Blade Runner.
Like tears.
Yes,
and rain.
So yeah, Roy Batty aside, I enjoyed this one. It's different, but it's got a very unique sound, I think, and it's got a lot of interesting parts and instruments that all kind of line up together in a very interesting way. A little extra info on Dan Wentz. When he was at High Voltage Games, he was also the audio designer for both the Saints Row and the Red Faction series, which are both pretty popular games. So, in inclusion to the Descent series, he's got some credits on some other high-profile games
I've heard
as
of
well.
both of those.
As have I. I mean, I know your co-host Mike really loves the Saints Row series.
Yeah,
so. All right, so let's move on to Free Space 2. This was released for PC only in 1999. Again, developed by Volition, published by Interplay, composed by Dan Wentz and also Scott Lee. And of course, there was a Red Book Audio only soundtrack. What's your first track?
So this track is simply called Numbers from Free Space 2 by Dan Wentz and Scott Lee. right. That was a track from Free Space 2. It was called Numbers, and it was by Dan Wentz and Scott Lee. Kind of calm yet stressful track. That's the word I was looking for earlier. Stressful.
Yeah, I think suspenseful is probably a better...
Yeah.
It's not thrilling, but it's just like there's an air of like, what's going to happen next kind of going on with it.
Yeah. And then they do that pause where you expect it to come back like louder. You expect something to happen differently, and it just keeps going down.
Oh, yeah. That first rest was like, why did you rest there? The second one, at least there was a key change after it, so it got a little more intense, but that first one was like... All right.
Yeah, but this was a very, very slow build. Like it does get more intense from the beginning to the end, but it's like whatever the maximum intensity is right there at the end, and they start very low at the beginning. So over this, what is this, almost 3-minute track? It's such a slow build. It's hard to notice. And about maybe halfway to 2/3 of the way through, I recognized, like, oh, there's another instrument in here that was not here in the beginning. Like,
yeah,
one more.
And then that other one towards the end, higher.
Yeah, they added some other like notes, some other things musically in there to actually change it up in the last third. But I think that's actually why I picked it, because it was such a slow build that it didn't make sense the first time I listened to it in my head, and then as I listened to it a second time, it made far more sense, and it was just neat to see how slowly they built that up.
Yeah, no, I agree. It feels a little more advanced over the Free Space 1. Like there's a little more meat to it. In battle, the battle music has some dynamic tracks where if you look at the game files, they're all kind of split up into very short, and they're kind of pieced together depending on what's going on, whether the enemy's attacking, whether you're running low on supplies, blah 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 blah. So we tried to find music that is less dynamic so that we could play it on the show more easily without having to kind of stitch things together. So these are some of those songs that we're listening to, but I think there's like 70 different individual pieces of music in this game, but like 40 of those 70 are all like 30 to 12 second pieces that would kind of interstitch with other ones. As far as the gameplay goes for Free Space 2, there's not too much to say that we haven't said before. The game was developed and released less than a year after Free Space 1 came out, so they basically just enhanced the original Free Space engine. The first game did so well and got such good reviews, so they really wanted to kind of pump out another one quickly, which may or may not have been a benefit to the market. There are graphic improvements to the already great-looking game engine. There's an upgrade to 32-bit color over the original game's 16-bit, so you're looking at a definite improvement on graphic fidelity there.
Oh, for sure. And the game focuses more on huge battles with multiple giant ships and swarms of fighter ships, rather than having many smaller battles like in the first game. Plot-wise, the humans and the Verudans alliance proved successful in the long run, creating the GTVA, Grand Theft Virtual Auto, the Galactic Terran Verudan Alliance, a rogue military branch that calls themselves the Neo-Terran Front, opposes the alliance and seeks to destroy the GTVA. And to make things worse, the Shivans show back up and start making trouble in their neighborhood. The rest is fly, fly, shooty, shooty, bang, bang.
Yeah, exactly. So now it's, you and the aliens are together, which is cool because now you can fly some alien ships and get some differences in gameplay there. But then you've also, again, got two different factions to worry about, which you're fighting other humans, and you're also fighting what's left of the Shivans. So there's a lot of variety there, and if you watch gameplay, you'll notice a lot of like huge Star Destroyer size vessels that you're attacking, as well as like swarms of smaller enemies coming at you. So they do, they take a lot from like the cinematic Star Wars universe battles and kind of try to recreate their own version of that in the game, and it works well. The game was very well reviewed. Unfortunately, it didn't sell well at all. There was like a total of 26,000 copies sold in the US, and like the first year it came out, like people just ignored it. And what I was mentioning before, with it coming out less than a year after the original one, is I think people just weren't ready for it yet. I think people were still discovering Free Space and or still playing it, and were like, well, you put out a sequel and it doesn't look too much different. I'm going to stick with this game where there's still a community just growing for it. and they didn't really, give thought to the fact that they wanted to wait for people to get tired of the first one to move on to a second one.
Yeah.
So again, it was like it's considered one of those hidden gems where it's a great game, like Descent 3, still holds up in terms of graphics and gameplay, but just kind of got swept under the rug. So because of that, there were no expansions, there was no ports to other systems, and no sequels. Like Volition moved on to other things, Outrage moved on to other things, and the Descent series kind of like dropped from that point forth. So
that's unfortunate.
Kind of a shame, yeah. All right, so we're going to play one more track from Free Space 2. This is my selection, Battle E. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. That was Battle E from Free Space 2. They kind of dropped the whole Descent line off of this game's title as well and just kind of called it Free Space 2, which, again, maybe also was kind of its detriment. Maybe people didn't see the Descent on the box and was like, didn't associate it with the game. I don't know. I wasn't, in this sphere of space simulation games back in 1999, so I'm not sure what the community was and how well they recognized this game as being an actual sequel to the original. I mean, it says Free Space 2 and the original was called Free Space, but just I think that Descent recognition there, maybe fans of Descent 3 would have moved over to it if they had kept that label on there as well. So
that's fair.
Who knows? Anyway, so the only other composer besides Dan Wentz, who we've talked about extensively, was Scott Lee, and he doesn't have any other credits or info on the web except for this game, so womp womp. Sad trumpets. That's really all I have to talk about with this one. Again, like I said, go check out some gameplay. If you're a fan of, Star Wars space battles, I think Free Space 2 is a good place to start. Or if you're a fan of like Wing Commander or games like that, chances are you don't know much about Free Space 2 because it seems like not many people do. So go check it out for the gameplay. The soundtrack is hit or miss. The Free Space soundtracks are definitely not my favorites of the Descent series. Also, because of the large amount of data they needed to fit on the CD, and because of the large amount of dynamic music on the CD, the soundtracks were compressed pretty hard. So if you're noticing kind of a drop in audio fidelity for the Free Space music on the podcast, that's just because good CD quality versions of these tunes don't exist. And as an audiophile, that really makes me cringe. I can't sleep well at night unless I get like wave or FLAC versions of all of these lossless quality songs for VGM. It's great being able to do that for chiptune and stuff, but when you get to games around this era where most music was like heavily compressed to put on like PlayStation and Saturn era, it hurts my ears. It hurts my ear hearts. Anyways, let's move on to our very last game of the show. Again, not officially a Descent game, but very, very closely related, even more so than Forsaken. We're going to be listening to a couple tracks from a game called Overload. This was developed and published by Revival Productions for PC, Mac, Linux, PS4, Xbox One in 2018, composed by an all-star Descent cast, Allister Brimble, Dan Wentz, and Justin's uncle, Luke Schneider, as well as Jerry Berlonghieri. Fantastic game, fantastic soundtrack. What you got first up?
Speaking of my uncle, I'm going to play a track called Tetrahedron by Luke Schneider.
All right, let's hit it.
Right, welcome back. That was Tetrahedron by Luke Schneider from the game Overload, which came out in 2018. It's more recent.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could tell 2018, the production is much more modern. The melodies are a little more modern. It sounds a little more poppy,
Yep.
but it also has that kind of industrial, dark dance edge to it as well. This envelops a lot of those themes.
Yeah, I actually feel like this one kind of, in my mind, it's spinning. So it's spinning between light and dark a lot. Like there's a lot of brightness in it, but there's also like it bounces back and forth a lot.
Would you say it's many-sided, like a tetrahedron?
I would. Tetrahedron, by the way, is my 4-sided die. It's a pyramid. So if anyone didn't know, the bass in this also very much to my liking. Very both fat and buzzy. So a lot really going on here that drew me into this track.
Yeah, it starts off with like that low bass, and then there's like some guitar there too, which I thought, which was really cool. Some distorted guitar, but it was underneath that kind of grindy synth, which is a really cool choice. I thought it was accentuating the synth instead of the other way around. Like a lot of industrial music, you'll get the guitar up top with a synth underneath it to make it feel a little more robotic or a little more weird, but having them reversed was a cool inventive sound that isn't done very often, so I did appreciate that. I keep saying good production, but I really did like the production on this. Very rich synths, very well composed piece of music. This whole soundtrack is awesome, by the way. I was very excited about it after hearing that the game was coming out, and I think the soundtrack hit Bandcamp slightly before the game was released, so I went out and picked it up pretty quickly and was like, it was a mainstay in my stereo for like at least a couple months after I got it. So nice. Really nice stuff. Let's talk a little bit about Overload and why it's not as far related from Descent as you might think. The members of Revival Productions, which was the studio behind the game, include founders Matt Torschlag and Mike Kulas, who you might remember as being the inventors of the Descent series. It was also co-founded by Luke Schneider from Radian Games. So he was a producer as well as a composer on the project. It started with Mike and Matt and Luke in an email discussion, with Schneider being the one to come up with the name Overload. In December 2014, Torschlag let former Parallax employees know about the establishment of Revival Productions. He was basically putting feelers out to see if anybody who had worked on the previous Descent games would, A, have any problems with them bringing the game back from the dead, but also seeing if anybody was interested in working on it with them. The project was put on hold for some time. Most of the Parallax members had other engagements and couldn't commit time, but Chris Clayfin, a former artist at Volition, ended up joining the project, and he was just what they needed to start things going and working on textures and getting stuff ready for the game. So the four launched their Kickstarter campaign on February 10th, 2016. The project was partially funded with $306,000 raised from about 5,000 backers on March 12th. So even though they didn't get fully funded, they felt they had enough to get the game going, and with the backers' permission, they were able to keep the money, which normally doesn't happen if you don't fully back a Kickstarter project, and they were able to get to work on the game. Nice.
The game is set primarily on the moons of Saturn, where facilities have sent out distress signals about the mining robots turning hostile. Gee, why does that sound so familiar?
And to assist in navigating around the level, the player can call up a hologuide, a holographic bot that can lead the player to a destination similar to the guide bot from Descent 2, and a fully three-dimensionally rendered automap based on a similar feature seen in Descent, showing the areas of the level that the player has already discovered or spotted. So they're really not pulling any punches with saying,
no,
we just want to make another Descent.
Yeah, it's fairly plain to see that they wanted to make Descent 4, but couldn't agree on rights with Interplay, so they decided to come as close to Descent as they possibly and legally could.
Yes, there was actually a fan project called Descent Underground that was being worked on for a while, and through a combination, Interplay was making it very difficult for them, cease and desist letters and stuff, and so that project got kind of dropped. So based on that, the former members of Parallax felt that instead of trying to make a game that presented itself as a direct sequel to the Descent series, that they would do the similar style gameplay. And actually the existence of Forsaken, they said, allowed them to do this, because Forsaken already existed as a kind of Descent clone. Nobody sued, nobody did anything about it. So that set the precedent. Hey, we could do exactly the same thing and not worry about getting sued, because if we do get sued, we can say, well, there's Forsaken. You can't patent this gameplay style because multiple games, multiple IPs have this gameplay style, so we're just using a similar gameplay style. So they felt comfortable in being able to produce Overload without any, worries from Interplay, even though Interplay knew that they were interested in making a game of that style. So shrewd move on their part, and when the game was released, Descent fans were very excited, and it sold pretty well. It got, 80s and 90s on reviews from, game critics. Basically, they said it was a little bit repetitive. Some of the enemies were a little bit the same-ish, and there wasn't as much variety in the levels as they were expecting. However, the Descent fans were overjoyed because it held up to their expectations of a Descent game, whereas, game reviewers and magazines and websites were coming from a AAA game kind of perspective, where every level needs to be totally different, and then you never have the same enemy twice, and that kind of a thing, when they were really going for more of a late 90s, early 2000s kind of gameplay aesthetic. So
they had a plan and they executed on it.
Yes. So the demographic they were making the game for liked it a lot, which was fantastic. All right, so rounding out the home stretch on our show, we're going to listen to one final track. Finally, an Allister Brimble track. This is called Complexity, and again, from the game Overload, released in 2018. I'm enjoying the complexity of complexity. That was Complexity by Allister Brimble from the Overload soundtrack released in 2018 on PC, Mac, Linux, PS4, and Xbox One. We've come a long way, baby, from the FM sounds of our first track all the way to here. What'd you think about this one?
How complex.
Yes.
I liked the kind of repetitive chuggy guitars in this one. I got a little bit just lost in the sauce listening to it. It felt like almost like a short industrial loop on repeat.
Yeah, it did have some variations in there, but it really oscillated between like the cinematic stuff and this just grindy industrial metal. I picked it specifically because I felt like it really rounded this episode out well. It included a lot of the dark dancey stuff from the Descent games, along with Dan Wentz's cinematic stuff from the Free Space games, and kind of like smooshed them together. And it was like, well, here's everything that Descent is kind of rolled into one package. I thought Brimble did a fantastic job at kind of melding those two genres together and making just this evil-sounding cinematic track.
Yeah, I enjoyed the strings that were paired up with these industrial-sounding guitars. It kind of like a dichotomy, a complexity, if you will.
It sure did.
In the song.
Yep. Brimble, as I mentioned on our previous episode, Quattro Games, his body of work is absolutely immense. He's been releasing some really, really good soundtracks lately that you should definitely check out, which kind of flown under the radar. A sequel to the Neo Geo shoot 'em up Androdunos just got released called Androdunos 2. Allister Brimble composed the soundtrack for it, which I thought was weird, but also really cool. The soundtrack is fantastic. If you want to check it out, you can go over to my VGMbassy Discord, and in the VGM resource channel, you'll see it under I believe I put it in the PC folder, so you can download the Androdunos 2 soundtrack and check it out. Lots of really good electronic shmup music on par quality with what we've just heard from him, so I think you'll really enjoy it. Aside from him, Overload's composer roster reads like the perfect wrap-up to this podcast. We've got Dan Wentz from the Descent MIDI soundtracks and Free Space, Allister Brimble, of course, from the PS1 port soundtrack, Jerry Belongieri from Descent 3, Luke Schneider, who was an artist and level designer on Descent 3. His only other music credit, though, is the Powerpuff Girls Defender of Townsville game, which was released on like Android, iOS. It was like a mobile game, and it came out on Windows too. But his design credits also include Red Faction and Saints Row, just like Dan Wentz, so he worked alongside him on many games. So he probably ended up at High Voltage at some point as well. So it was a cool kind of farewell to all the composers that we've shared. And I really like that they were able to get the old Parallax crew together and have one last hurrah for this awesome game. Overload also has a VR mode, and I've played the PC version and really enjoy it. It feels very much like Descent. Like again, like I kind of said with like Descent 3, there's not too much to talk about. It just feels very much like an updated Descent game. I haven't done VR because I'm scared. Like I said, I don't get motion sick with VR much, but I think this would be the game to tip that scale. And I don't want to get all barfy and have a sour note on this game. And generally, it's weird. Whenever if I play a game normally and then I switch and like try it in VR, for some reason, it's so immersive that I can't go back to play it normally again. It's kind of like getting like two monitors at work. Like you can never go back to one screen again.
Yeah, that's fair.
VR is kind of like the same for me. So I don't want to like get into VR with this game and then never be able to go back again. So maybe if I've 100%ed it at some point, I'll try it in VR just for, kicks. And that'll be my last hurrah with that game. But so lots of different music, lots of different composers, lots of different technology used to make all that music. Any highlights for you, Justin?
There are so many tracks. I don't know that I could pick even highlights. I really did like something out of everything that we had here. Highlights for me: Haunted by Type O Negative.
Of course.
The Mark Walk and an Ogre song, Ratsis, was also really cool. I kind of got to give it up to the first couple of tracks we played from Descent 1. The MIDI tracks for level 22 and level 3 were really, really cool. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a soft nostalgia spot in my heart for anything like chiptune and like retro gamey. They fit right in. And then the rest of it, like the evolution of the music has been a trip. I mean, just no other way around it. It's been wild going from, like you said, the FM synth sound to this incredible Red Book audio from 2018.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's why I love doing a lot of these music history shows, because you get, like even with the Mario Golf show, we started off with NES, and we end up with full streaming Motoi Sagaraba cinematic rock songs from the Mario Golf Switch game. And it never fails to surprise me just how on genre or on theme the music can remain while expanding its sound hardware and capabilities. And I love how game composers can do that, can make it sound more modern, but also make it feel like they all belong together. When you listen to all of these songs from MIDI all the way up to, Overload, they all thematically fit together for the most part. A few outliers with the cinematic stuff with the Free Space series, but the rest of it all feels like it all goes together, but uses very different technology, all composed by different people, but all feel like you can kind of listen to it and be like, yeah, I could see that as being a Descent soundtrack,
Yeah.
So it gives me a new perspective on video game music throughout history, and I hope it changes your perspective too, dear listeners. Yeah, so my favorites, I think, remain, like I said before, the MIDI compositions from Dan Wentz for Descent 2. I'm just a sucker for, similar to like what Tim Fallon does, I'm similar for pushing, for music that pushes hardware to its limits. And I feel like he really took MIDI and did everything you could possibly do with it to great effect with those compositions. And Berlinghieri's compositions on Descent 3 were a treat too, and kind of a surprise to me. I didn't listen to them closely enough, I think, before we played them on the show. And your pick from the Mercenary expansion was really good.
Oh, yeah.
Every time I listen to research, I hear new things in that, because there's so much packed into that 10-minute song, and it just really gets to me. So I love that one as well. Like I said, I'm going to make an edit of all the meaty parts of that tune and just, I don't know, use it to sleep. Put me to sleep at night.
Fair. Yeah.
Rock me to bed with Descent in my head. Yeah, man, thanks for being on the show. I know it's long. It's at 11 o'clock at night now. We started around 7:30. So we've been hanging out for a while.
Yeah, I didn't even realize. I knew it was after 10.
See, time flies when you're having fun. Mm-hmm. No, but seriously, thank you for hanging out. I know, you and Mike do great things over at XVGM Radio. Where can we find you over there?
So you can find us at our website, xvgmradio.com, where you can learn more about our podcast, about our guests. You're on there because we've had you on the show. Yay. As well as other podcasters, musicians, YouTubers, stuff like that. You can check out all of our episodes there. We're also on Twitter at XVGM Radio and Instagram also at XVGM Radio. But you can also find me and you at arcanemachine.net, where you can, again, listen to our episodes and check out our Discord. If you are into the music that you heard here, give it a shot if you haven't already, because you might be surprised and you might like a lot more of the stuff than you think you might. Yeah, for sure. This definitely fit under a lot of like dark wave industrial stuff, which is very similar to what we play on that show as well. Including information about the bands and the composers on that show. It's very similar to the VGM podcast format, so it's a lot of fun to do. Wrapping up the show, I would like to thank, of course, our composer of our theme song, Trevin Hughes, a.k.a. Dread, and Indira J. for all of the art and website assets that you see on the VGMbassy.com. Speaking of the VGMbassy.com, you can head over there, check out the liner notes and the credits and the descriptions for all of our shows, as well as check out our widget for our Discord server on the right-hand side of the page. And when you join our Discord, you get access to awesome stuff, like hanging out with all of our friends and VG ambassadors. Like I said, I also have a huge collection of hand-ripped VGM music. I think it's like 20-something gigabytes worth of music at this point. And you can also request soundtracks that I don't have, and I'll do my best to upload them for you in as high a quality as possible. Or you can head over to patreon.com/thevgembassy and join my Discord and get a whole bunch of totally cool perks, like access to our Patreon exclusive lounge
in our Discord. Also suggesting themes for shows and soundtracks for our Blind Listen episodes. At the high enough tiers, you can actually buy your way onto the show and become a guest VG ambassador with a theme of your choice. Also, you get thanked at the end of every show. So on our tourist level, we've got Cameron Childs and Nathan Cooper. At our VG emissary tier, Chris Murray, Chris Myers, Chris Steenerson, Gannon11 aka Mike Stark, Jordan Worma, Kyle Kroll, Ben aka The Dyad, and Daryl Bowers aka The Last Rican. At our audio attaché tier, Cameron Childs, Cameron Worma, Carlos from the Heroes 3 podcast, and Scott McElhone. Our special agent tier, Keyglyph, Orion Steele, and Volt Supreme from Volt Supreme's Synth VGM Dream Stream Machine. Our VG ambassadors, of course, Frankly Zappa, and the patron saint of VGM podcasts, Alex, the Messenger. All right, so next month, we'll be releasing a show alongside a whole bunch of other podcasts that I think XVGM is also participating in, called The Masters of VGM. And it's going to be a whole bunch of different podcasts and podcast hosts picking their favorite composers, just playing some tracks from them, talking about who they love the best, who is the top 4 composers of their lifetime, more or less. So it'll be a lot of podcasts talking about their passions. We are going to have a central hub where you'll be able to see all of the VGM podcasts that are participating in this Masters of VGM event. And it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to have a special guest VG ambassador on with me to share their favorite VGM composers. And I don't know, maybe you'll be able to guess them, maybe not. But it's going to be a great show regardless. So we will see you back with our Masters of VGM show in about a month. Justin, we'll see you on the next XVGM Radio and the next Arcane Machine.
Yeah.
Thanks for hanging out with me so late. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
In the meantime, stay cool, stay safe, keep listening to Awesome VGM. Bye, everyone.